battered human scout ship broadcast its challenge to the advanced Zanari fleet, shocking the aliens with the audacity of the primitive vessel's demand for their surrender. Captain Carl Wilson gripped the armrests of his command chair, his knuckles white as he stared at the viewscreen filled with sleek, deadly alien warships. The Odyssey, little more than a rusty bucket of bolts next to the gleaming Zanari vessels, had barely limped away from a skirmish with space pirates, and now faced a far greater threat. "Sir, we're being hailed by the Zanari flagship," Lieutenant Sarah Novak reported from her communications station, her voice tight with tension. Carl nodded, his jaw set. "Put it through." The screen flickered, replaced by the haughty visage of Admiral Xander, the Zanari commander. His features were sharp and angular, his eyes cold as he regarded the human crew with disdain. "You dare to challenge the might of the Zanari Empire," Xander sneered, his tone dripping with contempt. "Your primitive ship is no match for our fleet. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift." Carl leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "We may be outmatched, but we will not yield. The Odyssey and her crew will fight to the last to defend humanity's place among the stars." Xander scoffed. "Foolish humans. Your species is a mere footnote in the annals of galactic history. We are here to seize the nearby Epsilon system and use it as a staging ground to conquer this region of space. Your pathetic colonies will be crushed beneath our boots." The bridge crew exchanged worried glances, the gravity of the situation sinking in. If the Zanari took the Epsilon system, the human colonies there would be defenseless against invasion and subjugation. Carl's mind raced, searching for a way to even the odds. He thought back to the old tales of Earth, legends of cunning underdogs triumphing over powerful foes through wit and trickery. A plan began to take shape, a desperate gambit that just might give them a fighting chance. He stood, facing his crew with a determined expression. "We may be outgunned, but we are not outsmarted. The Zanari think us primitive, beneath their notice. We'll show them the true strength of human ingenuity and courage." The crew nodded, their resolve hardening. They knew the risks, but they would not back down. The fate of their species' foothold in the stars hung in the balance. Carl turned back to the viewscreen, his eyes blazing with defiance. "Admiral Xander, you underestimate us at your peril. The Odyssey and her crew will not go quietly into the night. We will fight, and we will find a way to victory, no matter the cost." As the screen went blank, the bridge was silent for a moment, the weight of their challenge hanging in the air. Then, as one, the crew burst into action, preparing for the battle to come. They may be battered and outmatched, but they were human, and they would not let their people's future be stolen without a fight. Carl turned to his crew, his eyes alight with a desperate idea. "Lieutenant Novak, I need you to modify our communications array. Rig it to broadcast a distress signal claiming we're carrying an unstable experimental weapon that could blow at any moment. Make it clear that if they destroy us, the blast could take out their entire fleet." Novak nodded, her fingers already dancing across her console. "Aye, Captain. Broadcasting on all frequencies." "Engineering," Carl barked into the intercom. "I need you to make the Odyssey look like a ticking time bomb. Rig the power core to emit erratic energy fluctuations and radiation spikes. We need to sell this bluff." "On it, sir," Chief Engineer Mike Donovan replied. "We'll make her look like a dog's breakfast." As the crew worked feverishly, the Odyssey began to transmit the fabricated readings. The ship's power levels surged and dipped erratically, while radiation levels spiked to alarming levels. On the Zanari flagship, Admiral Xander frowned as his sensors picked up the anomalous readings. "What is this trickery?" he muttered. His tactical officer, Commander Zoll, studied the data with growing concern. "Sir, if these readings are accurate, that human ship is a floating disaster waiting to happen. If it detonates, it could take us all with it." Xander's eyes narrowed. He had been ready to swat the primitive vessel like an insect, but now hesitation crept into his thoughts. The potential loss of his entire fleet was a risk he couldn't ignore. Back on the Odyssey, Carl watched the Zanari ships holding position, their weapons still charged but not firing. "They're buying it," he said. "Now let's keep them guessing. Helm, Initiate erratic maneuvers. Make it look like our systems are glitching due to the weapon. The Odyssey began to twist and turn, its movements jerky and unpredictable. The ship shuddered, adding to the illusion of instability. Comms, start transmitting coded messages on our secure channels, Carl ordered. Make it seem like we're calling for reinforcements. Hint at a hidden human fleet converging on our position. As the deceptive messages beamed out into space, the Zanari grew increasingly unsettled. Xander paced on his bridge, his thoughts churning. "This doesn't make sense," he growled. "Our intel indicated the humans were primitive, no match for our fleet. But this suggests they have capabilities we never anticipated." Zal nodded, worry etched on his angular features. "Perhaps our information was incomplete, sir, if there is indeed a concealed human fleet." Xander thumped his hand on the console. "We can't risk it, not until we know more." He opened a channel to the Odyssey, his voice taut with suspicion. "Human vessel, explain your actions. What is the nature of this weapon you claim to possess?" Carl appeared on the screen, his expression one of dogged commitment. "Admiral Xander, I urge you to reconsider any aggressive actions. The experimental device on board is highly unstable and could detonate at any provocation. The consequences would be catastrophic for both our ships." As the tense standoff continued, the Zanari fleet held position, unwilling to make the first move. Carl knew he had bought some time, but he needed to keep the pressure on. He turned to his crew, his voice low and urgent. "Prepare for Phase 2. We need to convince them that backing down is their only option. It's time to raise the stakes even higher." The Odyssey crew nodded, their commitment hardening. They knew the next move would be the most critical yet, a gambit that could either force the Zanari to retreat or lead to a desperate confrontation. Carl felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The fate of the human colonies and the balance of power in the region rested on the success of their audacious bluff. He steeled himself, ready to play the final card in this high-stakes game of deception against the mighty Zanari fleet. Carl's eyes darted across the flickering readouts on his command console. "Lieutenant Novak, initiate Protocol Omega. Make it look like we're losing containment." Novak's fingers flew over her station. The Odyssey's power core surged, sending waves of energy coursing through the ship. Lights dimmed and brightened erratically. A low, ominous hum filled the air. "Broadcasting distress call now, sir," Novak reported. Her voice crackled over the comms, feigning panic. "Mayday, Mayday. This is the UES Odyssey. Experimental weapon containment failing. Requesting immediate assistance from nearby fleet elements. Situation critical." Carl nodded grimly. "Helm, begin drift pattern alpha. Nice and slow. Make them think we're losing control." The Odyssey's thrusters fired in short, irregular bursts. The ship began to list towards the Zanari fleet, as if drawn by an invisible force. On the Zanari flagship, Admiral Xander paced furiously. "Status report!" Commander Zoll studied his screens intently. "Sir, the human vessel's power signatures are wildly unstable. Radiation levels are off the charts. If those readings are accurate..." Xander snarled. "Pull back. Maintain safe distance. I will not risk this fleet on some human trick." The Zanari ships began to retreat, creating a widening gap between them and the approaching Odyssey. Carl allowed himself a small smile. "They're buying it. Sensors, what have you got?" "Scans complete, Captain," the sensor officer reported. "Detailed analysis of Zanari ship configurations, weapons systems, and shield frequencies. Transmitting data packet to colonial outposts now." "Good work. Keep it up. We need every scrap of intel we can get." The bridge rocked suddenly. Carl steadied himself against his chair. "What was that?" Chief Engineer Donovan's voice came over the intercom. "Sorry, Captain. That was us. Just set off some minor explosions in the cargo bay. Thought it might sell the illusion." "Nice touch, Chief. Keep it up." On the Zanari flagship, Xander watched the Odyssey's erratic approach with growing unease. "Any sign of human reinforcements?" "Negative, Admiral," a subordinate replied. "Long-range scans show no other ships in the vicinity." Xander's eyes narrowed. "And the distress call?" It appears genuine, sir, but we can't be certain. The Zanari leader growled in frustration. The humans were primitive, yes, but clearly more cunning than anticipated. If they truly possessed such a weapon. Back on the Odyssey, Carl knew time was running short. The bluff couldn't hold forever. But every second bought was another second closer to finding a way out of this mess. Steady as she goes, he told his crew. We've got them on the back foot. Now let's see if we can't push them right out of this system. The battered human ship continued its slow drift towards the Zanari fleet. Two juggernauts locked in a deadly dance of deception, with the fate of humanity's galactic presence hanging in the balance. Carl's eyes darted between the tactical display and the main view screen, his mind racing. Now or never, he muttered. Lieutenant Novak, initiate emergency reactor jettison protocol. Make it look good. Novak's fingers flew across her console. Aye, Captain. Falsifying containment breach warnings now. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as the crew carried out Carl's orders. Warning klaxons blared, and red emergency lights bathed the command center in an eerie glow. Engineering, I need those explosions, Carl barked into the intercom. Chief Donovan's voice crackled back. Coming right up, sir. Seconds later, the Odyssey shuddered violently. Carl gripped his chair as a series of controlled detonations rippled across the ship's hull, simulating catastrophic systems failures. Reactor containment at critical levels, Novak shouted, her voice laden with manufactured panic. Initiating emergency jettison. The ship lurched again, more violently this time, as the reactor core disengaged from its moorings. Carl watched on the tactical display as the glowing signature of the core drifted away from the Odyssey. Broadcast on all frequencies, Carl ordered. Let's make sure our Zanari friends get an earful. Novak nodded, keying the ship-wide comms. Mayday, mayday. This is the UES Odyssey. Reactor core jettisoned to prevent catastrophic detonation. All vessels maintain safe distance. On the main view screen, Carl watched with grim satisfaction as the Zanari fleet scattered, their formations breaking apart as they scrambled to distance themselves from the Odyssey and its unstable reactor. They're buying it, Carl said. Time for Phase 2. Helm, activate the core's emergency thrusters. Set it on a collision course with the Zanari flagship. The helmsman complied, his hands steady despite the tension. On the tactical display, the jettisoned reactor core changed course, now hurtling towards the heart of the Zanari fleet. Carl leaned forward. Novak, more distress calls. Let's turn up the heat. Reactor core unstable, Novak broadcast, her voice cracking with feigned terror. Imminent detonation. All ships clear the area immediately. The Zanari fleet's movements became even more erratic as they attempted to intercept the rapidly approaching reactor core. Carl allowed himself a small smile. Deploy the decoys. A swarm of small drones launched from the Odyssey, each one programmed to mimic the energy signature of the jettisoned reactor. The tactical display lit up with multiple potential threats, sowing confusion among the Zanari vessels. Now's our chance, Carl said, his voice low and intense. Helm, maximum thrust. Get us past that fleet and set a course for the colonies. We've got to warn them. The Odyssey's engines roared to life, propelling the battered ship forward at breakneck speed. They streaked past the disorganized Zanari vessels, their maneuver so bold and unexpected that for a moment, the alien ships didn't react. As they raced towards the human colonies, Carl turned to Novak. Send a coded transmission to all colonial outposts. Alert status red. Zanari fleet inbound. Transmit all sensor data we've gathered on their ships. Novak nodded, her fingers dancing across her console as she compiled and encrypted the vital intelligence. Carl knew they had bought some time, but the real fight was yet to come. He could almost feel the fury of Admiral Xander as the Zanari leader realized he'd been outmaneuvered. Tactical, what's the status of the Zanari fleet? Carl asked. They're regrouping, sir, the tactical officer reported. Looks like they've figured out our ruse. They're forming up to pursue. Carl nodded grimly. All right, people. We've pulled off one miracle today. Now we need another. Let's see if we can reach those colonies before the Zanari catch up. The Odyssey pushed onwards, her engines straining as she raced towards the human-controlled system. Behind them, the Zanari fleet gave chase, their superior technology slowly but surely closing the gap. Carl stood at the center of the bridge, his posture straight, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead. They had a fight ahead of them, but they'd already proven that humanity wouldn't go down easily. Whatever came next, they would face it head-on. The Odyssey burst into the human-controlled system, its engines straining. On the console, a ragtag fleet of colonial ships came into view. "Colonial Defense Fleet hailing us, Captain," Lieutenant Novak reported. Carl nodded. On screen. A grizzled man with a patch over one eye appeared. "This is Admiral Hastings of the Colonial Defense Force. Odyssey, what's your status?" "Admiral, we've got a Zanari fleet on our tail," Carl said. "They'll be here any minute. We've gathered crucial intel on their ships and tactics." Hastings' eye widened. "Transfer that data immediately. We'll need every advantage we can get." As the information streamed to the colonial ships, Carl watched the tactical display. Red dots representing the Zanari fleet crept closer to their position. In the war room of the Colonial Command Station, Carl stood before a holographic display of the system. Colonial commanders huddled around, their faces grim. "Their shields are strongest here and here," Carl said, pointing to specific areas on the Zanari ship schematics. "But we've identified vulnerabilities in their power distribution network. A coordinated strike here could disable multiple systems at once." Admiral Hastings nodded. "Good work, Captain. We'll use this to plan our defense." As the meeting concluded, alarms blared. A young ensign burst into the room. "Zanari fleet detected on long-range sensors." Carl rushed to the bridge of the Odyssey. The view screen showed the massive Zanari armada approaching, dwarfing the Colonial Defense Fleet. Admiral Xander's face appeared on the screen, his eyes burning with rage. "You thought you could outsmart us, humans? We will crush your pathetic colonies and that impudent ship of yours." Carl cut the transmission. He turned to his crew. "It's time for our final play. Chief Donovan, are the drones ready?" Donovan's voice crackled over the intercom. "Aye, Captain. Primed and ready in the cargo hold." "Launch them now," Carl ordered. The cargo bay doors of the Odyssey slid open. A swarm of sleek black drones shot out, their energy signatures pulsing in perfect mimicry of Zanari technology. On the Zanari flagship, alarms blared. A subordinate turned to Admiral Xander. "Sir, we're detecting multiple Zanari signatures throughout our fleet." Xander snarled. "Impossible. It's another human trick." The drones infiltrated the Zanari fleet, latching onto ship hulls and burrowing into computer systems. Chaos erupted across the alien armada. On the bridge of a Zanari cruiser, consoles sparked and systems failed. The ship's captain shouted, "Weapons offline. Navigation's gone haywire." Similar scenes played out across the Zanari fleet. Ships veered off course, colliding with each other. Weapon systems misfired, striking their own vessels. Carl watched the bedlam unfold on his tactical display. "Now's our chance. All ships engage." The colonial fleet surged forward. Smaller, more maneuverable human ships darted between the floundering Zanari vessels, striking at weak points identified by the Odyssey's intel. Carl gripped his chair as the Odyssey dove towards Xander's flagship. "Target their primary power coupling. Fire everything we've got!" The Odyssey's weapons lanced out, striking the Zanari ship with pinpoint accuracy. Explosions bloomed across its hull. On the Zanari bridge, Xander stumbled as his ship rocked from the impact. Sparks showered from shattered consoles. "How is this possible?" he roared. "Retreat! All ships! Fall back!" The once mighty Zanari fleet limped away, leaving behind a trail of crippled ships and debris. On the Odyssey's bridge, the crew erupted in cheers. Carl allowed himself a small smile. "We did it. We actually did it." But their celebration was cut short. Alarms blared across the ship. Lieutenant Novak's face paled as she studied her console. "Captain, we've got a problem. Those drones, they're infecting our systems too." Carl's blood ran cold as he watched critical systems across the Odyssey and the colonies begin to fail, one by one. The victory they had fought so hard for now teetered on the edge of disaster. The Odyssey's bridge erupted in a shower of sparks as another Zanari blast rocked the ship. Carl stumbled, gripping his chair to stay upright. Smoke filled the air, stinging his eyes. "Hull breach on Deck 3, Lieutenant Novak shouted over the din of alarms. "Emergency force fields holding, but barely." Carl wiped sweat from his brow, his mind racing. They were so close to the colonies, yet the Zanari pursuers showed no signs of letting up. The precious cybernetic data, their only hope against the virus ravaging their systems, was stored in a secure data core in engineering. If they couldn't make it back... "Status on our stealth systems?" Carl barked. Chief Engineer Donovan's voice crackled over the comms, punctuated by the sound of frantic activity in the background. "The cloaking fields offline, Captain. Were visible to every Zanari sensor in the sector." Carl cursed under his breath. Their carefully planned stealth approach had disintegrated into a brutal running battle. He could almost feel the Zanari ships closing in, their superior weapons slowly but surely wearing down the Odyssey's defenses. "Helm, evasive pattern Delta," Carl ordered. "We need to buy more time." The ship lurched as it veered sharply, narrowly avoiding another barrage of Zanari fire. On the main view screen, Carl watched as a massive asteroid field loomed ahead. A desperate plan formed in his mind. "Take us into the field," he commanded. "Full impulse." The helmsman's eyes widened. "Sir, at that speed..." "Do it," Carl snapped. "It's our only chance." The Odyssey plunged into the dense field of space rock and ice. Massive asteroids filled the view screen, spinning lazily as they hurtled past. The ship weaved between the obstacles, its hull scraping against jagged surfaces more than once. Behind them, the pursuing Zanari ships hesitated at the edge of the field. Carl allowed himself a small smile. The alien vessels were larger, less maneuverable. They wouldn't risk... His thought was cut short as a Zanari cruiser smashed through an asteroid, debris scattering in its wake as it barreled after them. "They're still on us," Novak reported, her voice tight with tension. Carl gripped the arms of his chair. "Divert all remaining power to engines and aft shields. We make our stand here." The Odyssey surged forward, diving deeper into the asteroid field. Carl watched the tactical display, his heart pounding as the distance between them and their pursuers slowly began to grow. Suddenly, a massive asteroid loomed directly ahead. There was no time to avoid it. "Brace for impact," Carl shouted. The Odyssey smashed into the asteroid at full speed. The bridge crew was thrown from their seats as the ship shuddered violently. For a moment, all was chaos. As the dust settled, Carl pulled himself up, ignoring the pain from a gash on his forehead. "Damage report!" Novak's fingers flew over her console. "Hull breaches on multiple decks. Life support at 60%. But sir, the Zanari ships, they're gone." Carl stumbled to the view screen. True enough, the space behind them was empty save for drifting asteroid fragments. Their high-stakes endeavor had worked. But their victory was short-lived. A new alarm blared, somehow even more urgent than before. "Captain," Donovan's voice came over the comms, heavy with dread. "That last impact, it damaged the containment field around the cybernetic data core. We're losing it, sir. If we don't get this data to the colonies in the next hour, it'll be corrupted beyond recovery." Carl's blood ran cold. They had the key to saving the colonies from the virus, but their ship was crippled, stranded in the heart of an asteroid field, and time was running out. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what came next. "All hands, this is the captain. Prepare for emergency evac procedures. We're abandoning ship." As his crew stared at him in shock, Carl strode towards the turbolift. "Novak, you have the bridge. I'm heading to engineering. We've got one shot at this, and I'll be damned if I let those Zanari bastards win now." The turbolift doors hissed shut behind him, leaving the bridge crew to carry out his orders. Carl leaned against the wall, his mind racing. They had survived the Zanari attack, but their greatest challenge was still to come. The Odyssey limped into the human colony system, its hull scorched and battered. On the bridge, Carl gripped the arms of his chair as another tremor shook the ship. "Status report," he barked. Lieutenant Novak's fingers flew across her console. "Multiple hull breaches, sir. Engines at 12% capacity. Life support failing." Carl nodded grimly. "Initiate emergency evacuation, all hands to escape pods." Alarms blared throughout the ship as crew members rushed to their designated evacuation points. Carl turned to his strike team leader. "Commander Hayes, get that data to the outpost. It's our only hope." Hayes nodded, clutching a small data drive. "What about you, sir?" "I'll make sure everyone gets off safely. Now go." As Hayes and his team sprinted towards the nearest escape pod, Carl coordinated the evacuation from the bridge. Escape pods jettisoned from the dying ship, streaking towards the distant outpost. Suddenly, the tactical officer shouted, "Sir, Zanari ships incoming!" Carl watched as the alien vessels closed in, their weapons charging. "Divert all remaining power to shields. We need to buy time for the evacuation." The Odyssey shuddered as Zanari energy beams lanced out, barely deflected by the failing shields. Carl knew they couldn't hold out for long. "Status on the evacuation?" he demanded. 80% complete, sir," Novak reported, "but we've got crew trapped on decks 4 through 7. Carl's teeth gritted. "I'm going down there. Novak, you have the bridge. Get everyone else off this ship." As Carl raced through the corridors, he heard the telltale sound of Zanari boarding craft latching onto the hull. He reached a group of trapped crew members, their path blocked by a collapsed bulkhead. "This way!" Carl shouted, leading them to an alternate route. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a squad of Zanari soldiers. Carl didn't hesitate. He charged forward, tackling the lead alien and wrestling its weapon away. The narrow corridor erupted in chaos as humans and Zanari clashed in close-quarters combat. Carl fired the alien weapon, its strange energy bolts dropping 2 Zanari. He shouted to his crew, "Go! Get to the escape pods!" As the crew members fled, Carl held off the Zanari advance. He ducked behind a fallen support beam, the alien energy weapon scorching the metal around him. His mind raced, searching for a way out of this mess. Inspiration struck. He tapped his comm badge. "Engineering, can you trigger a plasma leak in this section?" "Aye, Captain," came the response. "But sir, that'll—" "Just do it." Moments later, a hissing sound filled the air. Carl grinned as the Zanari soldiers paused, confused by the strange mist filling the corridor. He held his breath and sprinted past them, making it to the emergency airlock just as the plasma ignited. The explosion rocked the ship, incinerating the Zanari squad and buying precious time for the remaining crew to evacuate. Back on the bridge, Carl found only a skeleton crew remaining. "Status?" "Last escape pod away, sir," Novak reported. "But we've got more Zanari boarding parties incoming." Carl nodded grimly. "Time to abandon ship, but we're not going quietly." He input a series of commands, overriding safety protocols. "I'm setting the reactor to overload. We'll take some of these bastards with us." As Carl and his remaining crew raced to the final escape pod, explosions rocked the Odyssey. They piled in, the airlock sealing behind them, just as a group of Zanari rounded the corner. The pod blasted free of the dying ship. Through the viewport, Carl watched as the Odyssey erupted in a massive explosion, taking several Zanari vessels with it. As their tiny craft streaked towards the outpost, Carl's eyes hardened. "This isn't over," he growled. "We've got a war to win." Meanwhile, at the colonial outpost, engineers hunched over terminals, frantically analyzing the stolen Zanari data. Chief Engineer Reeves wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes widening as he deciphered a crucial piece of code. "I've got it," he shouted. "The virus, it's not just a weapon, it's the key to their entire battle network." Commander Steele leaned in, her face etched with tension. "Can we use it against them?" Reeves nodded. "If we can upload a modified version to their flagship, we could take down their entire fleet." Steele straightened, her mind racing. "Assemble a strike team. We're taking the fight to the Zanari." As alarms blared, signaling the approach of the Zanari invasion force, the outpost erupted into frenzied activity. A daring plan was taking shape, a last bold strategy to turn the tide of the battle. In the armory, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Carl's most trusted operative, briefed her strike team. "Our mission is simple," she said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Infiltrate the Zanari flagship, reach their central computer core, and upload this virus. Failure is not an option." The team nodded grimly, checking their weapons and stealth gear. They knew the odds were stacked against them, but the fate of the colonies, of all humanity, rested on their shoulders. As they prepared to embark on their perilous mission, the first waves of the Zanari assault hammered against the outpost's defenses. The battle for humanity's future had begun in earnest. Carl's escape pod drifted through the debris-strewn space, alarms blaring as life support systems slowly failed. He gritted his teeth, hands flying over the controls in a futile attempt to coax more power from the dying systems. Suddenly, the pod lurched as an unseen force grabbed it. "What the hell?" Carl muttered, peering out the viewport. His eyes widened as he saw a sleek, dark ship materializing out of nowhere, its tractor beam pulling the pod towards an open airlock. Minutes later, Carl stepped cautiously onto the bridge of the stealth ship, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. He froze as he saw a familiar face at the helm. "Jake?" Carl's voice was a mix of surprise and suspicion. "What's going on here?" Jake Reynolds, Carl's former first officer, turned to face him. "Good to see you too, Captain," he said with a wry smile. "Welcome to the Resistance." Carl's eyes narrowed. "Resistance? What are you talking about?" Jake's face grew serious. "I've been running a secret cell, Captain, gathering colonists who've lost faith in the outpost's leadership. We're fighting back against the Zanari our own way." Carl shook his head, skepticism clear on his face. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Jake tapped a console, bringing up a holographic display of a massive Zanari vessel. "By striking at the heart of their invasion force, we're going to infiltrate their flagship and destroy it from within." Carl studied the schematics, his tactical mind already analyzing potential weaknesses. Despite his reservations, he found himself intrigued. "How did you get these?" "We have our ways," Jake said, a hint of pride in his voice. "But executing this plan, that's where we need you, Captain. Your experience, your tactical skills, they could make the difference between success and failure." Carl hesitated, weighing the risks against the desperate situation they faced. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Jake, I'm listening. What's the plan?" Over the next few hours, Carl and Jake worked feverishly, combining their skills and resources to forge a daring strategy. They assembled a strike team, merging Carl's surviving crew with Jake's most capable fighters. In the stealth ship's cramped cargo bay, Carl watched as technicians modified a captured Zanari shuttle. They worked with quiet efficiency, installing the virus payload and disguising its human signatures. "Are you sure this will work?" Carl asked, his voice low. Jake nodded, his eyes never leaving the shuttle. "It has to. It's our only shot." As they approached the Zanari flagship, hidden by their advanced cloaking technology, Carl took command of the bridge. His fingers danced over the tactical controls, orchestrating a series of diversionary maneuvers designed to draw attention away from the hangar bay. "Shuttle team, you're clear for launch," Carl said into the comm. "Good luck and Godspeed." On the main view screen, Carl watched as the modified shuttle slipped out of their ship and towards the massive Zanari vessel. His heart pounded as it approached the hangar bay, expecting at any moment to see it vaporized by defensive fire. But the deception held. The shuttle breached the flagship's defenses, disappearing into the cavernous hangar. For several agonizing minutes, there was silence. Then alarms began blaring across the Zanari ship. Carl allowed himself a grim smile as he saw critical systems failing, one by one. "It's working," Jake breathed, relief evident in his voice. Carl nodded, his focus never wavering. "Now comes the hard part. All units, commence attack." The space around the crippled Zanari flagship erupted in chaos as human fighters and missiles streaked in from all directions. Carl coordinated the assault with practiced precision, exploiting every weakness revealed by the spreading virus. Inside the Zanari ship, Jake led his team through twisting corridors, fighting their way towards the reactor core. Carl listened to the frantic comm chatter, his hands clenched as he heard the sounds of intense combat. "Jake, you've got hostiles incoming on your 6, Carl barked, spotting the threat on his tactical display. "Copy that." Jake's voice was strained. "We're almost there, but these elite guards are giving us hell." Carl's mind raced, searching for a solution. His eyes fell on a weak point in the Zanari ship's armor, revealed by the virus's data feed. "Hold on, Jake," he said, his voice steady. "I'm coming to you." Carl took manual control of the stealth ship, plotting a daring attack run that would bring them perilously close to the Zanari vessel's hull. As they closed in, he fired a pinpoint barrage at the weak spot, blasting open a hole that exposed the section where Jake's team was pinned down. The sudden decompression caught the Zanari guards off guard, giving Jake's team the opening they needed. They surged forward, breaching the reactor core's defenses. "We're in," Jake shouted. "Setting the overload now. Everyone, fall back to the extraction point." Carl held his breath as he watched Jake's team fight their way back through the dying Zanari ship. The stealth vessel hovered just outside the hangar bay, ready for a rapid extraction. Come on, Carl muttered, watching the countdown to the reactor overload tick away. With seconds to spare, Jake's shuttle burst out of the hangar, trailing smoke and plasma. Carl didn't wait for them to dock, pushing the engines to maximum as soon as the shuttle was in tractor range. Behind them, the Zanari flagship erupted in a massive explosion, tearing itself apart in a spectacular display of destructive force. As the shockwave dissipated, Carl surveyed the tactical situation. The remaining Zanari ships were in disarray, their command structure shattered. "All human forces, this is Captain Carl Wilson," he broadcast on all frequencies. "The enemy flagship is destroyed. Press the attack. Today we take back our system." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Human ships of all sizes converged on the disoriented Zanari fleet, unleashing a relentless assault that sent the alien invaders into a full retreat. Hours later, as the last Zanari ship fled the system, Carl found Jake on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. "Hell of a fight," Carl said, standing beside his former first officer. Jake nodded, his expression a mix of exhaustion and pride. "We did it. We actually did it." Carl's face grew serious. "For now, but they'll be back, and in greater numbers." "I know," Jake said, turning to face his captain and newfound ally. "But when they do, we'll be ready." The two men stood in silence, watching as the stars stretched into streaks of light. The stealth ship accelerated, carrying them back to a hard-won victory and an uncertain future. The euphoria of victory was short-lived. Carl and Jake huddled over a holographic display, their faces cast in an eerie blue glow as they analyzed the intercepted Zanari transmissions. "This isn't good," Carl muttered, zooming in on a cluster of red dots representing the incoming Zanari reinforcements. "They're throwing everything they've got at us." Jake nodded, his teeth clenched. "We can't hope to match that kind of firepower, not in a stand-up fight." Carl's eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical readouts. Suddenly he straightened up, a dangerous glint in his eye. "Then we don't give them one. We take the fight to them." Jake looked at him sharply. "What are you proposing?" "A strike at the heart of their war machine," Carl said, pulling up schematics of Zanari shipyards and weapons facilities. "We cripple their ability to wage war, buy ourselves time." Jake whistled low. "That's one hell of a risk, Carl." "It's that, or slowly get ground down to nothing," Carl countered. "We've got the tech, we've got the intel. We just need the guts to pull it off." Jake studied the plan for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I'm in. Let's do this." Over the next few days, they assembled their strike force. The hangar bay buzzed with activity as technicians swarmed over sleek stealth fighters, integrating captured Zanari tech with human ingenuity. Carl stood before the assembled pilots and operatives, his voice carrying across the bay. "This mission is nothing short of suicide on paper, but it's our only shot at long-term survival. We're going to hit them where it hurts, and we're going to make it count. As the strike force prepared to launch, Carl climbed into the cockpit of his fighter. He ran through the pre-flight checklist, his movements calm and practiced, despite the gravity of the mission ahead. "All units, sound off," he ordered as the squadron formed up. One by one, the pilots reported in. Carl allowed himself a small smile. These were the best of the best, and they were ready. "Engage stealth systems," he commanded. "Let's go hunting." The strike force slipped silently into Zanari space, weaving through patrols and skirting defensive grids. Carl's heart pounded as they approached their first target, the massive shipyards orbiting Zendarax. "Strike team, you are go for insertion," Carl said, his voice low and steady. Jake's voice crackled over the comm. "Copy that. We're going in hot." Carl watched as Jake's team's transport peeled away, heading for the shipyard's control hub. Then he turned his attention to the swarm of Zanari fighters pouring out of the facility. "All wings, weapons free," Carl barked. "Light 'em up." The space around the shipyard erupted in chaos. Carl's fighter danced through the melee, energy weapons sizzling past his canopy as he juked and rolled. He lined up a shot on a Zanari cruiser, unleashing a barrage that tore through its shields. Inside the shipyard, Jake and his team fought their way through waves of Zanari defenders. The narrow corridors echoed with the chatter of gunfire and the screams of wounded aliens. "Control room's just ahead," Jake shouted, ducking behind a bulkhead as energy bolts seared the air. "Cover me!" He sprinted forward, diving through the doorway as his team laid down suppressing fire. Jake's fingers flew over the alien controls, initiating the venting sequence. Outside, Carl saw the shipyard's defenses falter. "All units, concentrate fire on the main power couplings." A storm of human ordnance slammed into the weakened facility, ripping it apart from the inside out. As the shipyard began to break up, Carl allowed himself a moment of savage satisfaction. "One down," he growled. "Let's hit the next target." Over the following weeks, the human strike force carved a path of destruction through Zanari space. They struck weapons foundries, supply depots, and command centers, always staying one step ahead of the aliens' attempts to stop them. But the victories came at a cost. With each raid, their numbers dwindled. Pilots who didn't return from missions, operatives lost in daring infiltrations. The survivors pushed on, driven by the knowledge that every blow struck against the Zanari bought humanity precious time. As they regrouped after their latest strike, Carl and Jake pored over intelligence reports. The Zanari were in disarray, their leadership struggling to respond to the humans' guerrilla tactics. "We've hurt them," Jake said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "But we're running on fumes here, Carl. We can't keep this up much longer." Carl nodded grimly. He looked at the map of Zanari space, his eyes fixed on a heavily defended system near the core of their territory. "Then we make our next strike count," he said. "We go for their homeworld." Jake's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious," Carl replied. "It's time to end this, one way or another." As they began to plan their most audacious assault yet, the fate of two species hung in the balance. The final battle for survival was about to begin. Carl stared at the holographic display of the Zanari homeworld, its surface dripping with defensive installations. He turned to Jake, his eyes hard with drive. "This is it. Our last shot." Jake nodded, his face etched with exhaustion and determination. "We've come too far to turn back now." The hangar bay buzzed with frantic activity as crews prepped fighters and transports. Carl addressed the assembled strike force, his voice carrying over the din. "Today, we take the fight to the heart of the Zanari Empire. Every one of you knows the risks, but the fate of humanity hangs in the balance." As the fleet jumped into Zanari space, chaos erupted. Carl's voice crackled over the comm. "Execute Operation Trojan Horse. All units, stick to your assigned objectives." Jake's infiltration team slipped past the outer defenses, their stealth shuttle masked by the cover of a meteor shower. They touched down near a planetary defense node, disembarking with practiced efficiency. "Move fast, stay low," Jake ordered, leading his squad through shadowy canyons of alien architecture. They reached the defense grid's access point, Jake's fingers flying over the alien interface as he uploaded the virus. Alarms blared, but it was too late. The Zanari's weapon systems flickered and died. Meanwhile, Carl led the frontal assault on the orbital shipyards. His fighter dodged and weaved through a storm of enemy fire. All wings, form up on me. We need to keep their attention up here. The space around the Zanari homeworld became a maelstrom of explosions and weapons fire. Under the cover of this chaos, a small team of human operatives breached the heavily guarded research facility on the planet's surface. Lieutenant Sarah Chen led her squad through sterile corridors, dispatching Zanari guards with silent efficiency. They reached the central chamber, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Row upon row of stasis pods lined the walls, each containing a horrifically altered human form. Cybernetic implants protruded from twisted flesh, blank eyes staring sightlessly. "Dear God," Sarah whispered, fighting the urge to retch. "What have they done?" Her second in command, Corporal Rodriguez, gestured to a nearby console. "Ma'am, we need to complete the mission. We can't help these people now." Sarah's hand hovered over her comm unit, torn between duty and the desire to save these tortured souls. With a heavy heart, she made her choice. "Team, plant the charges. We're sticking to the plan." As they withdrew, the anguished cries of the hybrid experiments echoed in their ears, a sound that would haunt them for years to come. Carl and Jake regrouped their forces for the final push on the Zanari command center. The human troops fought with desperate intensity, clawing their way through waves of alien defenders. Blood-spattered and panting, Carl and Jake led the assault on the inner sanctum. They burst through the final set of blast doors to find Admiral Xander waiting for them, flanked by his elite guard. The Zanari leader's voice was cold and mocking. "You've come far, humans, but you're too late. Our doomsday weapon is primed and ready. The power of your own kind, twisted and harnessed, will be your undoing." Carl's eyes narrowed as he took in the pulsing energy conduits feeding into a central spire. The air crackled with barely contained power. Jake glanced at the reactor core, then back at Carl. A silent understanding passed between them. "For Earth," Carl said quietly. "For humanity," Jake replied. They charged forward, guns blazing, as Carl keyed in the overload sequence on his wrist computer. The room erupted into chaos as human and Zanari forces clashed in a final, desperate struggle. The reactor core began to whine, building to a deafening crescendo. Carl and Jake fought their way towards Admiral Xander, determined to see this through to the bitter end. As the energy reached critical mass, a blinding light engulfed them all. The last thing Carl saw was Jake's fierce grin, a reflection of his own unbreakable spirit in the face of certain death. The Zanari homeworld shuddered as the command center detonated in a cataclysmic explosion. The shockwave rippled outward, shattering cities and rupturing the planet's crust. In orbit, the surviving human ships watched in stunned silence as the alien world tore itself apart. Lieutenant Chen's voice broke the quiet, thick with emotion. They did it. Those crazy bastards actually did it. As the remnants of the human fleet limped away from the shattered Zanari homeworld, the true cost of their victory began to sink in. Crews worked in somber silence, tending to the wounded and taking stock of their depleted resources. On the bridge of the flagship, Acting Commander Chen gazed out at the stars, her eyes haunted by the horrors they'd witnessed and the weight of the sacrifices made. "Set course for Earth," she ordered quietly. "It's time to go home."
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.